Hi, my name is Shannon Curry.
I'm Kirsten Curran.
I'm Natalie Danny.
And I'm Carlo Dorenzo.
And for our project, we were researching how people feel about climate change. So in order to do a project on climate change, we needed to come up with a definition of what climate change was. So according to one of our multiple sources, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate change refers to any change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. So climate change is a really important issue that every single person should know about and educate themselves on, because within the next decade, there will be irreversible changes in our Earth from it. Climate change encompasses global warming, but also refers to a broader range of changes that are happening in our planet. These changes include the rising of sea levels, shrinking mountain glaciers, accelerating ice melt in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic regions. And then it also will shift power and plant blooming times. Now, these are all very important things for climate change, and it inspired the inspiration for our research because we wanted to get to the source of the problem of climate change. And the source of the problem that we found was who's responsible for it. We wanted to see who's responsible for all these things happening to our Earth, and we wanted to get to the problem of it. So with that, we wanted to go through people who are causing these changes, individuals and corporations.
So based off our research and literature review, we found that both corporations and individuals are responsible, but corporations and government hold more responsibility and ideally should be the ones taking the lead. The government is the one that enacts legislation which could regulate industries to remain within sustainable emissions, and corporations produce everything we buy and use. Individuals are also responsible in terms of traveling, overuse of energy, so like household energy use, and then also just basic consumption of products. But we've come to the conclusion that both have a cumulative impact, because companies will not produce what people will not buy, and the power of consumers is strong. But it pales in comparison to corporations. So despite the clear and present threat, mainstream media coverage of environmental issues rarely goes beyond forest fires, flooding, and storms. And then when information about the threat that climate change poses is not paired with solutions on what can be done. So there's a lack of noteworthy coverage. Which results in the public thinking that there's no serious action that needs to take place, or it basically just hinders any possible change. And then lastly, it suppresses guilt on individuals. So when the topic of climate change is brought up, one initially starts to think of individuals and how they can change rather than corporations, and which is counterproductive. It makes people feel hopeless.
So we came up with four main objectives for our research. The first one was to evaluate the basic understanding of the notion of climate change. Then we wanted to identify cognitive barriers such as the self and the social influence. Then we wanted to see who individuals blamed for climate change. And we wanted to specify important research gaps that provided motivating sustainable consumption. So our research method that we decided to use was an unstructured interview. We decided on this because, unlike a regular interview, an unstructured interview kind of deals with emotion as opposed to facts and like stats and stuff. And the free-flowing format of the interview kind of like leaves room for the interviewer to ask meaningful questions and kind of keep the interview going. Some of the questions that we focused on asking were, what is climate change to you? Do you understand climate change? And does climate change worry you? And with all of our interviewers, we kind of asked questions like this, but since every interview was different because it was unstructured, we were able to ask other questions. And if someone seemed passionate on certain questions or gave a good response, the interviewer was able to kind of dig deeper and try and get more information from them on that. And we kind of asked students who were in the ages of 18 to 21, and both male and females, so that we had a good amount of data and it wasn't too skewed in one direction. And we tried to keep our interviews around 20 minutes, but we realized that since it was unstructured and we all had different types of people that we were interviewing, the interviews could go either longer or shorter. So we kind of stuck to that, but we realized that our data would be different for each person.
We as a team were fortunate enough to conduct individual interviews with a few St. Bonaventure University students. The point of these in-depth interviews was to focus on uncovering underlying motivations, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings on the topic. Focusing on these themes throughout these interviews allowed us to get a general outlook of where our interviewees stood on climate change. All of these themes collected shared a connection. Some of these themes consisted of most people interviewed had not learned about it in school and had to either hear about it through news, social media, or by their own research. Another theme that stood out while conducting interviews was that some of our interviewees didn't show a level of willingness to change daily routines. This, of course, will come with a great level of fear from our interviewees. This contributes yet another theme within these interviews, which is the frightening feeling that comes with climate change. When asked if frightened by the progression of climate change, interviewees unanimously answered with a yes. Most respondents didn't think the media covered the issue. They feel as if it was not covered in the right way or it was not viewed as urgent enough. After hours of data analysis, our results were impressive. Our results showcased different feelings and perspectives about who is to blame for climate change, and different ways to how many people genuinely struggle with cognitive dissonance in everyday life. In summary, we drew the following conclusions from our research. Education is not significant on climate change. As stated, schools are shying away from educating students on climate change. The neglecting of educating students on this topic in schools leads many to not be passionate about it. When you lack passion, you tend to downplay issues, which happens frequently with climate change. State of awareness and concern about climate change does not change their willingness and ability to change. Individuals typically know that climate change is a problem, but try rationalizing the case by saying something along the lines of, this will not affect my personal life, so why should I care? This is quite interesting given the fact that even when they can acknowledge that they are committing selfish acts that could be harming the planet, many can't stop. Majority of respondents view the government plays a role in global warming through legislation and regulatory action. Consumer reduction is important in the absence of the government. Mostly everyone comprehended actions such as driving cars and not recycling could easily damage the environment. Yet many didn't feel as there were any suitable alternates set in place to discontinue these actions. Many tended to try and find their own ways and means of contributing to climate change, ultimately trying to suppress the feeling of guilt, as spoken about earlier. The media plays a big role in climate change awareness. Social media has progressed exponentially within the past decade. It has made its way to being the first thing being checked in the morning and the last thing at night. We noticed throughout our interviews, our interviewees didn't come across much coverage throughout social media platforms. Social media only covers the effects of climate change when relevant. Major events have to be happening in the world, such as wildfires or Earth Day, for the media to cover it. It feels like the media only covers climate change when it's beneficial, not for the sole purpose of educating. That being said, we owe the major contribution of this analysis to profound insight of how horrific climate change is, while many tend to sweep it under the rug. Consumers show the inability to take accountability. This case develops our understanding of consumer behavior by taking a more in-depth look into how consumers work, how consumers rank such issues.
So, after carrying out all of our research and remembering the inspiration behind what our passion was for finding this problem, we wanted to find out who was responsible for climate change. And it's now rewarding that we have that answer. We found that the state of awareness and concern about climate change does not change one's willingness and ability to change. Also, that the majority of respondents who view the government that plays a big role in global warming through legislation and regulatory actions. And lastly, that the consumer reduction is important in the absence of the government. In the absence of corporate responsibility, government, and industry, our recommendations are tough to achieve with all the environmental problems that the world is facing. Individuals need time to lead on this issue. Just by educating individuals, households, and even your own community and changing your personal patterns to consumption can make a difference. More attention is needed and a willingness to act and have an ability to change. If humans exercise intelligence and compassion to collectively push to solve this problem, it could really help. So for our group's finding, the state of awareness and concern about climate change does not change one's willingness to change the ability. This was very unsettling for us. With glaciers melting and the heat continuously rising, our respondents were brutally honest and they felt as if there was nothing to do. Our recommendation is that there's more overall education on climate change. Ideally, climate change should be talked about in schools, not just in one grade though, in all. Each year, scientists find more information that we did not know the previous year, and climate change should be a required topic for all science classes every single year. One unit of climate change does not help anyone when it's just in 6th grade. Hypothetically speaking, imagine there's a shampoo brand that you always buy, and you find out that their company was one of the biggest contributors to pollution. What would you do? That's an individual problem that companies make for us as the consumer, since we're unknowing of all the information of climate change that's going on. In conclusion, climate change is truly not the consumer's fault, and it is first the government and industry's fault. They play the biggest role in global warming through regulatory acts, and ideally should be the ones taking the lead. If we got more direction and actions from those in big corporations, it would be more of a domino effect than fixing the individual responsibility. Even though individual consumers cannot personally combat such large-scale issues, it doesn't mean that there's nothing that they can do. But unfortunately, since these products and energy uses from big corporations are unsustainable, we have to do our own research. Our hopeful outcome is that we will hope to see in the near future that our society is not being based on the idea that the consumption will meet our needs, but our Earth's needs. Thank you for listening to us.